Hello and welcome to Lynchburg Live. I'm your host, Linda Smith. I'm sure everyone has heard the term Advance Directives, but I wonder how many people really know what that means. My guest tonight is Reverend Wayne Lanham, who will be discussing Advance Directives and telling us or helping us understand why and how having them protects our wishes when we aren't physically and mentally capable of doing that. Wayne, welcome to Lynchburg Live.
Thank you.
You and I have been friends for a long, long time.
Yes, probably longer than either one of us want to admit.
Remember.
Yes.
Wayne was chaplain at Lynchburg General Hospital for Central Health. How many years?
I came in 1972 and retired in 2010, so about 38 years.
So you're a recent retiree.
Yes, 2010.
Well, what have you been doing since you retired?
Since I retired, I work part-time at Thorpe Funeral Home.
What do you do there?
I work with families. I help work visitations, work the actual funerals themselves, work with the grief process. We do educational programs, and that's part of what we do now. We do an educational program on Advance Directives and the need for pre-planning on funeral arrangements.
You know, you were always such a help to anybody in need at Central Health, and I'm sure that falls over into this new position that you have.
Meet a lot of the same people,
Yeah.
families through the years.
You know, we hear so much about Advance Directives. You know, for those of our audience who may not know what that is, do you mind just sort of telling them what it is?
Yeah, you'll hear it called different things. The first one was probably called a living will. You may have heard that term more. But in recent years, it's called an Advance Directive. You will also hear the term healthcare proxy, medical power of attorney. But the most recent one, and the one that's used the most, is Advance Directive. And basically, it's a form that if it ever happens to you that you cannot make your own healthcare decisions, this form has a lot of information, but the primary thing on it is it has two places on the form for you to put a person's name that if and when you cannot make your own healthcare decisions, then that person that's listed number one can speak for you, and if they can't find that person, then they go to the person that's listed as number two.
I didn't realize you had to have two people on there.
You don't have to have two, but there's space for two.
Yeah. And it's probably a good idea.
It is.
Why do you feel like, I mean, I know why I feel, and that having Advance Directives is an important thing?
It's very important because of all of our technology. Years ago, when someone said, do you want me to do everything as a medical question, the answer was probably yes, but it was limited as to what you could do. When you say, ask a question now, do you want me to do everything?
Is that to prolong your life? Or
to prolong your life, that could just cover a number of things. The most common one would probably be the use of a respirator. But there are all sorts of things now that can prolong it. And then you get into the whole question of quality of life. That's an individual question, and what I define as quality of life may be not what you define. And so that's why it's so important to have an Advance Directive, and then that person there on that dotted line knows your wishes.
And that's also, you just said, referred to as a living will?
Yeah, in fact, on a lot of the forms that you get now, it'll even have a section there. It says living will, but the living will was the earlier one and just did not have as much information as the Advance Directive does.
Now, you had said that you have two people to, you can have two people to sign. Now, is that like choosing a power of attorney, or is that something a little bit different?
It's you hear the term medical power of attorney, and the reason you probably hear that term, is sometimes people get a medical power of attorney confused with a general power of attorney. General power of attorney is what is used for financial issues, and then a medical power of attorney is just for medical issues, and the two are totally separate.
And is this also a healthcare proxy?
Yeah, you'll hear that term also.
So the document doesn't actually give the person on there power of attorney. Does it have to state medical power of attorney?
When you read the form itself, it makes it clear. It'll say like medical issues, medical questions, and the way that works. If you're in a hospital, and it's important to remember that this form never comes into play unless you cannot make your own decisions. And that could change. You could be in a situation you can't make decisions, and then the physician or a medical person may say, well, I need to talk to the decision maker. The patient can't tell me. That's why it's so important for that person that's listed on the form to know your wishes and understand what you want and do not want.
And it has to be somebody you trust.
Definitely somebody you trust, because you have to realize this person is making medical decisions for you because you cannot. You would not want anyone doing that did not know your wishes, or that did not like you.
Not necessarily the beneficiary
right.
of your...
It could be, or it may not be. And then it's important to remember, too, that it's their duty to follow through what your wishes are, not what their wishes are. Their job by law is to speak for you because you cannot.
And that can be difficult, I'm sure, sometimes when...
Yes, it can.
When you would like to prolong somebody's life, but you know that their wishes are otherwise.
Yes.
So it is important for not only the person who signs this, but for members of your family or a spouse. All these people should be aware that you have this Advance Directives.
And the thing about the Advance Directive in Virginia is it does not have to be notarized, and a copy is just as good as the original. So once you have one, then you could make 40 or 50 copies of it. It's very important that your physician have one. Obviously, it's very important that the two people on that form have one, and then anyone else that you want to have that form.
I was going to ask you this later, but you just sort of hit on it. Are the Advance Directive laws different from state to state?
They can be. For instance, an Advance Directive in Virginia does not have to be notarized. An Advance Directive in North Carolina does have to be notarized. But if you've got an Advance Directive and you live in Virginia and you go to North Carolina, it's good there. In other words, all the states recognize each other's Advance Directives, even though completing them may be different from state to state.
Now, this is an end-of-life type thing. That's when it would come into play.
It could be, but then maybe not altogether. For instance, what if you had a situation, someone was in a horrible car wreck, and for religious or cultural beliefs, they did not take blood products, and they're unconscious, they're unresponsive, and the doctor says, well, we need to do this and this and this. And if that person had an Advance Directive that said, I do not want this, then that is the decision of that person, and then it would be the decision of the person on that form to say no, they do not want blood products, for instance, because of whatever the reason.
And regardless of their personal opinion.
That's right. The person having to speak for that person may not believe that. But their job, if they're on that form, is to follow that person's wishes and not theirs.
Have you ever had a situation where the advance directives came into play, a decision was made, and then the person came back and didn't die?
Oh yeah, because for instance, maybe they were in a situation they couldn't make decisions. Someone spoke for them because they're on that form, and then that person gets better. Then they're able to make their own decisions, and I'm sure they would discuss what was made when they were unresponsive or couldn't make their own decisions.
Do you have to have advance directives done by an attorney?
No, they can be done by an attorney. They do not have to be. And they can be done. They can be picked up in different ways. There are lots of them around. The only thing when you complete an advance directive, if you do not understand the terminology before you start writing information on it or checking blocks, make sure you understand what you're writing or what blocks you're checking. And if it's a detailed one with medical terminology, simply ask someone that's trained in medical terminology to explain what that means before you sign it. For instance, say someone did not understand the terminology DNR, and this actually happened.
And you tell them what this means in case they don't know.
Yeah, you would tell them what it means, and I was helping a lady fill one out, and she said, I do not want to be resuscitated. And I looked at her and I said, well, now what do you mean by that? And she said, well, if I'm on a respirator and I'm unconscious and something happens, I do not want to be resuscitated. And I said, well, what if you're in a bad car wreck, a lot of your ribs are broken, and we had to put you into a medically induced unresponsive state, and something happens? Oh, well, I want to be coded then because I'll probably get better. And I said, well, but that's not what you told me to start with, so you do not want to put that down the way you said it.
You know, I would imagine, just listening to you, that these online advance directives are okay, but probably not the best way to go. I would think you needed somebody to be there with you to explain these things to you.
It is better for someone to explain it to you because most of them are pretty straightforward, but now some of them use medical terminology, and if you don't understand it, then you need to have someone to explain it to you.
You know, if you're terminal and you're in the hospital and you decide to do advance directives in the hospital, do you have to have someone verify that you are of sound mind to do this?
That gets a little sticky, but unless someone has questioned the fact of your capability, then it's really not an issue. Now, if it becomes an issue, then there are medical things that you have to do to say, yes, they do have capacity to complete one, or they do not, and you can get into some medical and legal terms. But most of the time, unless there's a reason to question it, it's not an issue.
So, but you would suggest anytime you go into the hospital for anything, for an illness, for a bad case of pneumonia, for a surgical procedure, major or minor, it would still be a good idea to take a copy of your advance directives
Yes,
with you.
and in fact, most hospitals now, when you're admitted, part of the nursing assessment procedure, they will ask you, do you have an advance directive? And you say yes or no. And then if you say yes, then they say, well, have you got it with you? And you say yes, then you give them a copy. They make a copy of it, depending on the hospital, whether they have everything is computerized or not. it becomes a part of your permanent medical record. And then if you come back into that hospital again, then the question is still, do you have an advance directive? Yes. And if you remember, just say, when I was here before, they asked me that. It's a part of my permanent medical record. They bring it up, and in most cases, you just sign it and date it, then that makes it current, and it just keeps going that way.
You know, when I was doing research for this show, it occurred to me, what happens if you're on a trip outside this country? How do the laws vary? Should you take a copy of your advance directives with you?
That's harder in other countries. It would always help. Now the question to how legal it would be is going to depend on the country. But it would certainly be better to have it than not have anything.
I mean, I can imagine that that could be a nightmare.
Yes, yes.
In a situation
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Now, there was just something I wanted to say, and I think we have enough time for me to say it. When my mother was in the hospital before she died, she had been in and out a couple times, and someone came and asked her about advance directives. Well, we had already brought them to the hospital, but she was listening very patiently, and the girl was explaining, you know, if you find yourself unable to speak for yourself, and do you want to be resuscitated if it comes down to it? And she looked at that woman and said, I've read enough Stephen King books to know that you never come back right, so please don't bring me back. Of course, that's a testament to her sense of humor.
Yes.
But, you know, people may connect things like that.
Yes, and they make some unusual connections sometime, and that's why it's even better to talk about it. Someone may have a misunderstanding as to what they are. I've even seen people before that will say, well, if I complete one of those and they've got it, maybe they won't treat me. Well, of course, that's not true at all.
Right.
That has absolutely nothing to do with that, but it can be a misconception of what it is.
I wanted to ask you earlier, and I forgot it. If someone is in an automobile accident and is likely not to make it on the scene, they know that, but someone resuscitates that person anyway and takes them to the hospital, they're on a ventilator, and find out, you know, this person had advance directives. Is there a legal issue with something like that?
Usually that would, probably not, because that would be a situation of you're doing what you were trained to do,
Right.
and you had no other information to tell you to do otherwise.
Right.
That,
It's sort of like the Good Samaritan
yes,
law.
yes. Mm-hmm.
My next question was going to be, should you carry a copy of your advance directives with you? I'm sure nobody does.
No one does, but interestingly enough, they now have you can actually get little cards that has limited information on it. And now there are several places now that are like a national bank type thing for advance directives, and you have like a code and you carry that number with you, and if you were in a hospital somewhere and you have this card that has this code, they can automatically retrieve your advance directive. But I don't know of anyone that just takes them with them.
Well, I mean, you know,
yeah.
it would be the last thing I would think to pack
Right.
for a trip.
Right, yeah, people don't, but of course with all the communications, it's not going to be that hard to get in touch with family, and you're probably going to get that information pretty quick.
Right, I'm sure you
Yeah.
are.
Mhm.
But you know, you think, in just
But you do
talking
think
about this, you
about it.
think about all these things that could
Yes.
conceivably happen.
Yes,
You
yes.
know, or someone coming into the hospital and not being aware, walking into a situation of a code.
Yes.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I know that we put DNR bracelets on people who have already
Mhm.
requested not to be resuscitated, which
Mhm.
means do not resuscitate. Now, if you've done advance directives and you change your mind about something you've written, can you revoke that?
Yes, you can revoke it, and there are several things that people can do. You can take the one that you want to revoke and you can just mark a big X mark through it. That becomes a part of a permanent record. And then the other issue, some people will say, well, I want to change it for whatever reason, and maybe something happens and the family or friends, they find two different advance directives. Well, that's simple because all you do then is you just look at the current date. And so
Well, that
even
would
if
make
even
sense.
if they didn't mark the first one out or say I revoke this, the fact that there's one with a later date is going to be the one that takes priority.
So they don't generally destroy a first one, but would keep it in the record, but
Different places do it differently, but kind of a backup system. A lot of places will keep the one that's revoked plus the new one, and then if there's any questions, well, okay, here's the one that was revoked and here's the new one. But some places say, well, it's been revoked, we don't need it, we've got the current one. They do it differently.
I'm sure they do.
Mm-hmm.
From your standpoint, from your perspective as working as the chaplain, dealing with people going through this, and now in your position sort of as a grief counselor at the funeral home, what would be the one thing that you would tell people considering doing advance directives?
The main thing I would say is if you don't remember anything else about why you should have one, just look at it this way. If you cannot make your own decisions, do you want someone to make decisions for you that knows your wishes, that's on that form, or do you want to take a chance on just someone that does not even know your wishes making medical decisions that affects your life?
Because if that happens, you could conceivably end up being on a respirator from now into eternity and being a terrific burden on your family with hospital cost
and never wanted that. But if you did not tell anyone you did not want that, or if you did not have an advance directive, then it's the kind of the assumption would be, well, they need to be on this. This preserves life. And that's what they would do.
Just a simple thing as resuscitating somebody, who codes at the side of the bed for whatever reason. I mean, that could be.
Yeah, and some people might say, well, if I go on a respirator, I want you to keep me there forever because that's what I want done. Now, my own personal advance directive, I have it in writing, and the respirator is the easiest one to explain, would be that if I'm on a respirator and I'm on there for a reasonable amount of time, and as far as the doctors know and science knows, I am not going to come off that respirator to where I would know my family, my grandkids. If that's the situation, then I have in writing, I do not want to continue to live this way, so please just let me go and let me die with dignity.
I think it's a way of having control of that last part of your life.
Yes, and that's a good way to put it. If you want to be in control of your life and medical decisions, then you need to put it in writing, because if you don't, in fact, in Virginia, it's called the Healthcare Decisions Act, and what happens if you do not have your wishes in writing, like an advance directive, and something happens and you cannot speak for yourself, I mean, what the law says is, and there's very few in this first situation, the guardian would speak for you, but that's not very common. The second would be your spouse. Then the next would be your children. Then the next would be your parents. Then the next would be your brothers and sisters. And then the next would be just kind of following the bloodline, nieces, nephews. And then there's another, the last one is if there is a friend that, and there's criteria for that friend to be able to make decisions for you. That may sound simple and easy, except in those categories, the majority rules. It's not the oldest. So for instance, say that you're in the children category that make decisions because you don't have it in writing, and you have 2 children. What if one of them says, well, I want to do everything for mom, and the other one says, no, mom's been through enough, she wouldn't want to keep going like this? Well, the majority of 2, if they disagree, you got a problem. And so that's even more reason to have it in writing.
Certainly is. Wayne, we're out of time.
Oh.
But I thank you so much
Well,
for coming
thank
on
you.
and explaining to people who may not understand what advance directives are. I think this is good for people to know, you know, whether they have it, whether they want it or not, they know it's out there. And I thank you again.
You're welcome.
I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show and have a better understanding of what advance directives are. My next show will feature an author from Washington, D.C., who was born and raised in Lynchburg. He's recently published his first novel, and he's going to come on and tell us about that, because some of the novel is based right here in Lynchburg. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.